Alright, now that I've got my guitar, bass, and drum set up, I've got all the rock elements I need to start working on the instruments bus. What I'll do is I'll have those 3 buses going to this track, and I'll have these 2 plugins on it. So the first one is Kazrog True Iron. This is absolutely not necessary, but I saw George Lover do it for a Loathed mix that I really liked. So I've kept it on and it's just stayed there. But I don't think it would make that much of a difference if I turn it off. And then I've got Procy on it. And this is a preset I set up after I saw Nolly do it. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to duck the snare every time it hits in the mix and try to bring all the elements back up, basically. So it makes the snare a little less crazy when it's moving everything through. This is really only if you have a heavy hand when you're mixing your snare in, but I really like the mid-range that a snare brings. So I usually use this and it usually takes off somewhere between like 1.5 to 3 decibels in a mix. So I'll show you with the off and then on. And now that I've got the instrument set up, I will show you all the different miscellaneous stuff that I'll be adding to it. So starting off, I've got this EQ. It's just got a couple dynamic bands, and it's just to make it sure that all the tracks that I put in play right with the mix as it is. So it's taking out a little bit of this low end and some body and a little bit of high end. So I'll start with the creepy ambience tracks that I make, and I really feel like this is kind of like my secret sauce as far as stuff that excites me when I'm working on a mix. This will usually be stuff that I'll add when I'm mixing it, so I'll just give you a sound of what it is straight up. It's a lot to get into, but this is all guitar sounds that I've done through a couple of different pedals, and there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do as you're reamping the guitars and messing around with the different things like a filter. It'll give you that opening up into a bigger sound thing that's really good for something like an intro like this. I think I'm actually going to make a whole video of how I usually do that stuff, just because that ambience is really interesting and it can add that last bit of flavor that you need for a song. And here's it during the breakdown as well. Even that riser is just guitar pedals and messing around with the filter on it. So the majority of that sound is from the pedal, but I've also got Soothe, Pro Q, compression just to make it sit right in the mix. Some other miscellaneous tracks I've got are the clean intro. This is a very sort of plucky, stringy sound. The reason why it sounds like that is I was using the middle pickup position split between a Lundgren M7 and Balger Truenabacher neck, and I found that the Lundgren M7 was actually out of phase for some reason, but I really like that sort of like twangy nasal sound, so I kept it in, kind of made it the characteristic of the track. So I kind of had to do a couple different things to tame it, but mainly I've got Soothe here, so before. This is one of those cases where I will use Soothe like a gun. And then I've got Pro Q also doing a lot of stuff to soothe it. And then I've got a compressor working here. What I'm trying to do is control it and also make it sound a little bit vintage if I can. And then I've got a widener. I love using wideners on single elements in solo because it really makes it such an obvious effect for you. I would highly recommend if you're mixing solo elements to try to mess around with a widener and just see what it does to the stereo field. And then lastly, I've got a reverb on it. Kind of gives it a layer of just this really thick blanket across the mix. And then I've got these 2 tracks. So these are the leads during the chorus, and the idea behind that is to give it a note that doesn't sound like it's exactly grounded to everything else that's going on. So it's a hard pan left and right. It's also a tone from pedals that I'm getting with various delays and reverbs. So it's got pretty much the same chain as the last one. And then the last track over here. I think the reason I separated this from the other clean is I wanted to have its own twangy thing for that part. So moving on, I kept the miscellaneous pretty easy on this one. So I've got one moment in the drop for the breakdown. It's got two different impact sounds, so I'll just play them here. So together they make a pretty big impact for the song, and I felt like that was really good for the breakdown. For the sake of production, I'll show you what that part sounds like before and after those. I was really considering not using any post effects like that for the song to kind of give it a more natural sound, but I felt you could really feel the impact with them in it. So this is before. And you can notice everything's not sounding quite glued yet. I don't have the mix compressor on yet, but I'm just going to show you guys this. So this is with it on. Really makes a big impact for that moment. Alright, so those are all the miscellaneous elements with that. So now I'm going to start adding the mixing stuff before I start adding the vocals. So for the mix bus chain I've got here, I've got everything including the instruments and the miscellaneous, and then eventually the vocals going into this mix bus compressor, and it's going to be doing a significant amount to glue the whole mix together. So I'll play it with off and then on. It's kind of making things a little bit quieter, but you'll notice as I add the limiter and the clipper later on, what it's really doing is gluing all those transients back a little bit and pushing the attack to meet the sustain of the mid-range like the strings, and really making everything sound thick together. So at this point I would start bringing in the vocals.